I used to live in West London in Shepherd's Bush. And every afternoon, Saturday afternoon, I used to go to Shepherd's Bush Market. You see, I was very keen to see what people were selling, what they were buying, but most importantly, what they were throwing away. Because frequently, among the rubbish of other people, I could find something useful for myself. For example, a wooden box from which I could make a cricket bat. But every Saturday afternoon at Shepherd's Bush Market, there was a very strange man. He was selling medicine. He was selling medicine in little bottles like this, with little tablets like this, and he told everyone that his medicine was the best medicine in the world. It could cure you of any problem which you might have, whether you had a headache, a toothache, muscle pain, rheumatism, neuralgia, even nostalgia. This would cure your problem. And he said that the reason why this medicine was the best medicine in the world is because, unlike many other medicines, it does not contain any acid. And everyone knows that acids burn. And he had some examples of medicines which contain acids to show people. He had a tin of Bernal Seidlitz powders. Now these are used to treat constipation. Read the label on the side, they contain tartaric acid. Acids burn, he would say. And then he had some Andrew's liver salts. Andrew's liver salts are used to treat indigestion. Read the label on the side. These contain citric acid. Acids burn, he would repeat. And then he had some aspirins. He had some aspirins which are used to treat all sorts of minor pains. And he read the label on the side. These contain acetyl salicylic acid. Rather than telling you what this could do in your stomachs, he said, I am going to show you. So he took 2 aspirin tablets and he placed them on the palm of his hand, and then he placed them onto some crystals which he had on a mat on a table outside the open air in Shepherd's Bush Market. And then he said, when you are suffering from a headache or a toothache, it is entirely possible that you may also have a sore throat. In which case, you might like to take some cough syrup. And he had a bottle of Sanatogen baby cough syrup. And he poured some cough syrup on. And then he said, you may not like the taste of this medicine, in which case you would like to drink some water. So he sprinkled some water on. And then he said, watch carefully, because in a few seconds you will see how this horrendous medicine containing acid can burn a hole in your stomach. And as he was talking, the whole thing burst into flame. And when people saw this, they were absolutely terrified. People said to themselves, I don't want to have that happening in my stomach. So do you know what they did, dear children? They started fumbling and bumbling around in their pockets until they found, sorry, I'm trying to find it. Ah, I've got it here. Until they found one of these. 2 shillings and 6pence, half a crown. Now that was a lot of money in those days. And every Saturday afternoon at Shepherd's Bush Market, people used to buy the magic medicine man's magic medicine. Now I have to tell you, dear children, that when I was 10 years old, I was very lucky. I was never ill. Even luckier still, I had no money. No money, no problems. But what I have to tell you, dear children, ever since I had been a tiny baby, I had developed a serious psychological malfunction. I had developed a secret and passionate obsession with fire. Now, my parents had bought me a chemistry set when I was 8 years old. And I used to mix all the ingredients together in the chemistry set in an attempt to make fire. But all I succeeded in making was fizzes, pops and smells, nothing like the magic medicine man at Shepherd's Bush Market. So I decided I would try to repeat his experiment. Now I knew where I could get the Sanatogen baby cough syrup from. That came from Boots the Chemist in Uxbridge Road. I knew where I could get the aspirins from. Boots the Chemist in Uxbridge Road. I knew where I could get the water from. It came from the tap. But I didn't know the identity of those crystals. So I decided to find out. I went along to Shepherd's Bush Library, and there I borrowed a book which was called Chemistry Magic. And I used to read in that book about all the recipes and mixtures which he used to make fireworks, pyrotechnics, makes things burn, to see whether there was a substance described in there which fitted the description of those purple crystals. And yes, dear children, there was a substance. It was called potassium permanganate. So, together with the other ingredients, I procured some potassium permanganate. I set up the experiment in my mother's kitchen at 44 Stanley Road, Shepherd's Bush, London, W12. And lo and behold, within half a minute, the whole thing burst into flames and filled the kitchen with smoke. That, my dear children, was the greatest moment of my life, for that was my first ever truly successful experiment in chemistry. And since that time, I have been conducting experiments, and the story of my experiments I will tell you indoors. So if we now move inside to find out what these experiments led to. Thank you very much for your attention so far. I will pick up now, please. We're just at the beginning. We're just at the beginning. I'm going to leave these here. I hope this will be safe for the next half an hour or so. Thank you very much. We move inside, and I will continue what I have to tell you. So what I wanted to tell you first of all, that my success there sparked off my continued interest in the science of chemistry. Now, I wanted just to go back a little bit to this experiment and to tell you first of all that the man at Shepherd's Bush Market was a complete and utter trickster. He was a rogue and a liar. The aspirins have nothing to do with that experiment. It is a common trick in advertising to frighten people into buying a product that they don't need. The medicine which he had was not a medicine at all, it was just bits of chalk wrapped to make them taste nice. And that, you see, is something for today. Nothing has changed in today's world. Today, there is a great deal of advertising as well by false means, tricking people into buying something that they're made to feel frightened because they don't know about. At that time, I instinctively believed he was a liar. Now, what happened? At school, I was very good at chemistry. I enjoyed my chemistry lessons, and I enjoyed especially experiments. And I have to tell you that I was very lucky that I had a chemistry set at home, and for me, one of my greatest pleasures was experimenting and making a gas like ammonia or sulfur dioxide, and then I wrote it in my diary. I have found my diary, which I kept in 1963. That's a long time ago. And I wrote in my diary what I used to make in my chemistry experiments. So much I loved the chemistry. And I did very well at school in chemistry until I was 15, to O-levels, because I knew all the work there from at home in any case. And we had very good teachers as well. We had very good teachers who would show us interesting experiments and demonstrations, and I enjoyed learning chemistry. Now, later on in A-level, just before university, I lost interest in chemistry. It was a little more too difficult for me. I was not interested in Heisenberg's equation and in Niels Bohr's structure of the atom. I always preferred experiments. That was always my strong point. So, I wasn't that brilliant, but nevertheless, I got into Imperial College to study, not chemistry. I was always broad-minded. I wanted to study natural sciences at Cambridge University, but alas, I didn't get into Cambridge. So, instead I went to Imperial College, where I studied chemical engineering. I was not a great chemical engineer. I didn't like it too much, it was very difficult, and I didn't like the students very much. I was too keen doing Polish folk dancing, you know, that sort of stuff, and I liked the company of young ladies. And you know what, all the students, they would drink beer and play rugby. I had no interest in either. But that doesn't matter. I finished my studies in chemical engineering, and I always thought I would go on to become a student forever. So I enrolled for another degree. I got a good enough degree in chemical engineering, and I enrolled for a master's degree in industrial safety. Now that was the most interesting course because I studied toxicology, I studied fire protection in buildings, explosion hazards, a whole range, ergonomics, man-to-machine relationship, a whole range of topics which I genuinely found very interesting. But before I finished writing my thesis for my master's degree, a friend of mine who had been at Cambridge University came to me and he said, could you come and teach in a local school, Cardinal Manning Secondary School for boys in North Kensington, because there are no chemistry teachers, that we're short of chemistry teachers. So I thought this would be wonderful. So I went along for an interview, you see, having had no experience of teaching, and the headmaster was very nice to me. And also, I have to tell you that I had been a Cub Scout master in the Polish Scouts. I'm of Polish origin, and I had a brother who was 10 years younger. So I knew when I was 20, I had a 10-year-old brother, and I had some experience with children. But the thing that surprised me the most was when I went to this school for my interview, the children, they looked at me and they started calling me sir. I couldn't believe it. They were calling me sir. I had never been called anything other than idiot, Szydlo, or go away, you fool. But for the first time, children were showing respect. So I thought, I must take such a job, where for the first time in my life, I could be a somebody. I had always been treated as a nobody, now, sir. So, this was a great honor for me. And I remember during my first chemistry lesson with Form 3C, and they were a difficult class indeed, but we had very good teachers at this school. And I demonstrated for them the properties of elements burning in oxygen. I had a load of gas jars, and I burnt the elements one by one, and by the end of the lesson, the whole room was so full of smoke that hardly anyone could breathe, but they loved the experiments. And if they wanted to be naughty, they stopped being naughty because they simply succumbed to the smoke and the sheer interest of the experiments. Now, I have to tell you that when I started teaching at Cardinal Manning School, I had a wonderful man who helped me, and he was from Mauritius. His name was Raj Virasamy. He was our laboratory technician, and he was the best technician I had ever come across. He became one of my very best friends. Regrettably, Raj is no longer with us today. But it's largely thanks to him that I was able to develop my passion for teaching and sharing my chemistry experiments with the pupils. Now, I have to tell you that when I was a teacher at Cardinal Manning School, I had a very, very interesting but unpleasant experience. You see, in 1973, a new invention came about, and that was the photocopier. For the first time, we were able to photocopy notes or something like that, you see. So a photocopier arrived on December the 17th, 1973, in the school office. So Raj came up to me and said, Andrew, we've got to try the new photocopier out. So we rushed downstairs to the office, and we said, hang around, what shall we photocopy? Have we got something to photocopy? But we had nothing. So I found in my wallet a £1 note. I had a £1 note, because in those days £1 notes, and I said, Roger, let's photograph some £1 notes. So I photographed this £1 note, you see, it was a black and white copy. I cut it up with scissors and I stuck it together, and I thought today would be nothing, but for me it was amazing to have a photocopy of a £1 note, a black and white copy. At any rate, I put it in my pocket. And then, what happened, I then went to take the register with Form 3C, and you see, it was just before Christmas, some of the pupils weren't there, and it doesn't matter, we didn't mind too much. And then, in the afternoon, that's right, one of the boys, Tom Dennehy, he came late for the lesson, he was 25 minutes late. And I thought, brilliant. I said, Tom, you've come to school. For those children, many of them, they played on the streets. They didn't like going to school. But Tom came in 25 minutes late. And I said, Tom, well done for turning up. Here's a present for you. And I gave him my photocopied £1 note. He said, oh, brilliant. Can I put it in his pocket? Now, in the afternoon, when I was taking the register, this was of no concern to me. I called and Tom wasn't in school, so were a few other people. It was close to the Christmas holidays, so I didn't draw any attention. After school, I then went down to I was writing the reports for the children, you see, and someone came up to me and said, Andrew, there's a telephone call for you from the school. They've come to the school. And I thought, that's very peculiar. Who would want to phone me at Cardinal Manning's school, which hardly anyone knew that I worked at this school? So I thought, that's a bit peculiar. I went down to the school office, and I picked up the phone, and this is what I heard. Is that you, Mr. Szydlo? Yes, speaking. This is Detective Sergeant Smith, Harrow Road Police Station. You is required to come down to the station immediately. I thought to myself, I said, what? A police officer ringing me? I then thought it's a friend of mine who plays practical jokes. His name is Bolek Jaworek, and he used to phone people up. So I said, Bolek, I've caught you. That's it. I know you're not an officer. But then the man said, excuse me, Mr. Szydlo, this is a perfectly serious telephone conversation. You is requested to come to the station immediately. And I thought, blimey, me, police station, what's this got to do with anything? So I said, excuse me, can you tell me what the nature of the business is? He says, Mr. Szydlo. Oh yeah, I said, how do I get there? That was my first, because I didn't know where Harrow Road Police Station was. So he said, well, where are you? I said, Cardinal Manning School. He said, you come out St. Charles's Square, turn left out Portobello Road, then go right down Harrow Road, it's a mile away, 10 minutes on the bike. But then I thought, hang around, me to a police station. So I said, excuse me, can you tell me what the nature of the business is? He says, Mr. Szydlo, the matter is too serious for me to tell you over the phone. And the phone went dead. And I thought, too serious? What can have happened that's so serious that they have to call me to the police station? And then I thought, of course, my father works in Edgware Road. He's an engineer there. And probably he's had an accident. So, because that would be the only reason to phone me if there's something very serious. So I thought probably my father's been killed in a road accident. So I started trembling and I was terrified and I cycled down, white as a sheet, and I climbed up 2 steps and I imagined the officers coming in, you know, and saying, Mr. Szydlo, sit down, here's a cup of tea, we've got some bad news for you, you know, etc. So I had this vision of being told there's some bad news for me. But you know what? I cycled into this I cycled down to the police station, and they did follow with cups of tea, 2 of them. They went up the stairs, they locked the room behind, put the tea down, and they said, Mr. Szydlo, we is now in a position to arrest you. I thought, arrest me, brilliant, yay! My dad hasn't died. That was the best news in the world for me. So I said, okay boys, tell me, what have I done? Then they said, Mr. Szydlo, don't you talk to us like that. Any word which you say can be taken down and used as evidence against you in a court of justice. So okay, relax, boys. They were threatening to arrest me and to lock me up, and I haven't done anything yet. So I said, okay, hey boys, relax. What have you got? I thought, what are they going to show me? What have they got to prove to me that I'm a criminal? They said, Mr. Szydlo, we have the evidence here. He lunged into his pocket, triumphantly pulled out a crumpled, photocopied £1 note. I thought, what? He must be mad. A photocopied £1 note and I'm a criminal. So I said, I'm ridiculous. He said, Mr. Szydlo, may I give you the warning again? We have found this on one of your pupils' pockets, and we is going to now make a statement for prosecution. And you do realise, Mr. Szydlo, that the maximum penalty for forging Her Majesty's banknotes can be 30 years in prison. I thought, okay, relax, boys, okay, you know, I'm just a 23-year-old school teacher, going easy, boys. They said, Mr. Szydlo, you is now going to tell us what you did, and we shall write a report. I thought, no, they said, I'll write it down, you tell me. I could not believe it. But you know what? Tom Dennehy, he was a good mate of mine. He would never, ever have gone to the... He wouldn't have even known it's forged. So I was a bit of a puzzle. I couldn't understand how it was that these police officers got this £1 note. So I was very angry by now. I said, this is ridiculous. So I started writing out all this nonsense, and I wrote out that we went down with Raji Boy, we photographed, copied the pound, I gave it as a joke or whatever. Go away and leave me alone. But you know what? As I was signing the document, as I was signing it with my name, Andrew Szydlo, S-Z-Y-D-L-O, they looked at me and they said, by the way, Mr. Szydlo, where was you born? And I said, Paddington Hospital. Now, Paddington Hospital was half a mile away. I was a local boy. Do you know why? They probably thought I was a Russian spy. Because, you know, if you have foreign name with strange and those days of Cold War with Russia, I could have been spy. But I was not spy. I was simply simple Andrew Szydlo so they gave up on me. They then sent me away, and I had a story which I've been telling to all my pupils for almost 50 years now. Now, what happened? I got back to school in early term. I said, Tom, what was all this pound note about? How did all that happen? He said, oh yes, I didn't tell you, sir. Now, Tom was Irish. This is the important bit of information. Now, the IRA had planted bombs, and there had been a bombing campaign. There had been Bloody Friday in July 1972. There had been bombs planted, and there was a whole terrorist activity. So what's happened? Anyone who was remotely connected to Ireland or Irish, they were searching them to see whether they had bombs or explosives or secret things. And Tom was on his way with his mother to a hospital appointment at Princess Louis Hospital in North Kensington, where I had treatment for my right foot in 1959. And as Tom was walking past the car park, the police officer said, we're searching you. We're searching everyone who goes into this car park. And Tom said, sorry boys, you're not searching me because I have the right of a citizen. You can't search me. He was right. And they couldn't search it. But then they were more polite. They said, would you mind turning your pockets out? They weren't looking for forged banknotes. They were looking for explosives or some IRA letters. So he pulled out a lollipop stick, a pencil, photocopy £1 note. And when they saw that, I said, hey, what's that? And he said, it's a £1 note. So where'd you get it from? He said, I just found it. I found it. And he was amazed. He couldn't believe it. He said, they said, you didn't find it. You got it in time. And you know what? They then took him and his mother and they locked him up in a cell. For 2 hours they interrogated him where he got a photocopied £1 note from. And at the end of 2 hours, his mother said, Tom, just tell them, let's get the hell out of this place. They'll deal with Mr. Because she knew it was from a joke from school. So Tom very unwillingly gave it. Now, do you know that they held them in custody until I came up? So when I went up the stairs, they were let out. They held him as for ransom. Can you imagine a more ridiculous situation, my friends? So I narrowly escaped. Nothing came of the event. Of course, nothing came. The solicitor for the Bank of England just dismissed the case as being absurd. What a waste of public money. At any rate, that was one of the stories from my early teaching career. I then started teaching. The boys were wonderful, and I decided that I wanted to move on to a school which is a little more prestigious. And so I decided I got into a top school called Highgate School, which was founded in 1565. It is now 454 years old, and in that Highgate School, I've been there ever since. I joined on the 1st of January 1975. Now, one of the first things that struck me as a teacher of chemistry was that the program, the syllabus they were teaching, was beginning to get easier and easier. They were beginning to remove some of the experiments which I had done at school were disappearing. Some of the historical detail which I learnt at school was disappearing. And I had 4 fantastic teachers, the 3 colleagues, Mike Morell, Peter Knowles, Humphrey Barnacle. Together, we were teachers for 21 years. We stayed as a unit, and I was the baby in the department till I was 46, and that was in 1995. And what happened? As we were all great enthusiasts, we used to have a chemistry club after school. Every Friday, children used to come and do experiments. All 4 of us used to help them do the experiments, and they used to make amazing things. They used to make things like liquid bromine, picric acid, carbon monoxide, all sorts of phosphine rings, all sorts of remarkable experiments in very, very comfortable surroundings, never a hint of an accident, a danger or anything. Everything was totally professional. And so this tradition continued. But at the same time, we noticed, all of us, that syllabuses started to get easier and easier. And my particular thing was, I had decided in 1974, while I was still at Cardinal Manning School, to write a book for children on chemistry. It was called Chemistry in the World Today, and I wrote 2/3 of such a book, and I then submitted it for publishing. Now, what happened? I decided that the most important thing that children should know when they learn anything to do with science is where that science came from. It's history. So, in other words, it is imperative to know about science and technology in ancient Egypt, in ancient China, in the Arabic countries, in the Central American countries. All of those great cultures had the beginnings and the fantastic achievements of science, which were now being completely pushed apart. Simple people were learning, they were coming into school, and the teacher would say, "Today, children, we're learning about atoms. Atoms are small, indivisible particles which can be found in elements, and atoms are composed of protons, neutrons, and electrons." And so on and so forth. So the children would say, okay, this is very easy. They'd learn it, they'd write all the form, they'd work out the atomic number, the mass number, relative atomic mass, but they knew nothing about where the history of atoms comes from. And I thought, this is ridiculous. You can't have this. That is not proper in-depth education. Now, I started getting involved in the debate for science education. My book, which I wrote, had the first publisher I wrote, John Murray, in 1977, he said, "This is brilliant, we might publish this." That came to nothing. Between 1977 and 1982, I had 86 rejections. Not a problem. I was still very young. I was still learning, but what was very strange, and this is what I couldn't believe, I was having amazingly successful chemistry lessons. I was very popular at school. We, as a team of teachers, were popular, but the experts were saying, this is not quite what we want. So I thought it's a bit odd. Experts? What experts at what? The book writers, the science education experts. And it was in 1982, though, that I had an interesting experience to tell you, which related to Shepherd's Bush story. You see, I used to tell the Shepherd's Bush market story to all my pupils. And in 1982, one of my pupils, Scott Debson, put his hand up and said, "Sir, do you know that my dad used to go to Shepherd's Bush market? He told me all about this magic medicine man." And I thought, that's amazing. So Scott Debson, a pupil in 1982, etc. Do you know what happened? 3 years ago, Scott Debson, a young lad, came to me and said, "Sir, my dad," we're now talking 2014, 4 years ago, yes, 5 years ago. So a young lad came up to me and said, "Sir, my uncle is Scott Debson, who you taught here, and he told me about the Shepherd's Bush aspirin story. And he said hello to you because he now lives in New York." So I thought, that's amazing. Send your uncle my very best wishes. Now, my dear friends, what happened in July, let me think, this was July last year. Where are we now? 8 months ago, Scott Debson came over from New York. And I arranged to meet him outside our school, and he brought his father with me. And we met together outside our school, and we took some photos, and we chatted, and his father said he remembers the magic medicine man who was a thorough rogue. He was known at Shepherd's Bush Market for his tricksters, and I just wanted to show you 2 photographs. Michelle, could we have just the 2 snapshots? Well, I don't know where you project. Look, there it is. No, that's the first. Can we have the other one first? That. You see, on that photograph there, that's me. That is the boy on my left, with the long hair. That is the nephew of Scott Debson. Scott Debson is on my right-hand side, and he is my former pupil. And his children, who are from New York, had flown over down there. Now, the next photograph you'll see is Scott's father. There it is, and we were together. He used to go. I was 11 and he was 9, And we used to go to Shepherd's Bush Market to watch the same magic medicine man. Isn't that an amazing coincidence? After 60 years almost, so there we have a nice little anecdote. Back to the classroom. So I continued teaching, you see, and I was very happy teaching the students. We did lots of experiments, and at Highgate School my career evolved. I started teaching some new syllabuses, etc. But all the time I noticed that the syllabuses were getting easier. Now, but at the same time, this is the strange thing, the Royal Society of Chemistry said, we need more chemistry teachers. We need more people to be involved in chemistry education. So I said, yes, please along. And I went along. I showed them some slides. I showed them a film I'd made. I showed them a whole lot of other stuff. And they said, sorry, no good. Sorry, we don't like you. Professors of chemistry education said, Andrew, this isn't quite what it's about. But I couldn't understand it, because in the classroom, I was a hero. The children used to love the lessons, but the experts said I was useless. So I thought, that's fine. I'm going to carry on teaching. I'm not going, if they think they know more. But at the same time, I started feeling sad for the children in the whole country who were being told by the experts of education what chemistry should be, and I could see the standards declining. Now, my 4 dear colleagues, they retired in 1995, in 2002, and they agreed. They said, but what can we do? A big change for the worse came in 1986, when they abolished O-levels. And when they abolished O-levels, they got rid of some of the best experiments in the chemistry syllabus. The preparation of sulfur dioxide and the properties of sulfur dioxide from concentrated sulfuric acid and from copper turnings. The reduction of copper oxide with ammonia to produce nitrogen and water. The preparation of liquid nitrogen dioxide from the decrepitation of lead nitrate. A whole range of experiments disappeared from the syllabus and have never appeared anywhere else. Now, those are the best experiments. Now they are obsolete experiments, and now, actually, I'm now bringing them all back in my own school, where I'm having special sessions with pupils showing alternate chemical experiments, because they taught real chemistry. And what started coming in is the social side of teaching. So people were taught that not that sulfur dioxide is an acidic gas which has very interesting redox properties. They were taught that sulfur dioxide is bad because it causes acid rain. They were taught that carbon dioxide is bad because it tortures global warming. They were taught that benzene is bad because it gives you cancer. They were taught that phosphorus is bad because it's highly flammable and toxic. And that's the type of language that the teaching started to adopt. Instead of teaching facts about how the real world works, they started giving it a social slug. A social slug, an obsession with safety, health and safety. You can't do this, you can't do that, don't do that. We warned you if you have an accident. So teachers started saying, I won't do it. So fewer and fewer teachers were doing. So now we have replaced true chemistry in the United Kingdom with fantastic experiments. Elephant's toothpaste. We have slime. We have volcanoes with fizzy, bubbly water. We have sparks when magnesium burns. And that is the sort of chemistry. It has now been detracted from its roots. The children are now taught that chemistry is fun, it's easy, anyone can do it. No, it's not easy. It can be fun, but it's very difficult. It's very interesting, but it's not fun. And this is the great error in education that I've been fighting for on my own, but with the support, do you know of who? Every single teacher that I meet when I go to primary schools. In the last 3 years, I have given 300 talks to 30,000 children, and they keep inviting me back. And the educationalists will still say to me, oh, why are you doing that? That's not the way it should be taught. And in my own department, they don't ask me, the teachers, any help or anything, because they teach the way that today you have to teach. And that is what I can do. So I am continuing on my mission to teach young people the truth, If I'm a chemistry teacher, I stick to the facts of chemistry. Chemistry is a science, and we present the science as it is known. Another example, in 1988, and then we'll move on to the results of my teaching and how I plan my lectures. In 1988, the Royal Society of Chemistry held a competition for teachers throughout the country. The purpose of the competition, they knew, was because there were fewer and fewer teachers wanting to do demonstrations, so they announced a nationwide competition for teachers to come and show a demonstration. You have to do a 10-minute demonstration. So I thought, brilliant, I'll enter this, my colleagues told me, enter this demonstration, you see, and we shall go along and see. So, from the whole of England, how many teachers do you think would enter a competition with a good prize for it in order to find the best chemical demonstrator in England? 3 teachers entered. 3 teachers from the whole of the United Kingdom. At Nottingham University in 1988, I specially flew over from a holiday. I was in Poland. I specially flew with my wife, who assisted me. I did a 10-minute demonstration on the chemistry of hydrogen peroxide. Now, the competition was judged by teachers. There were 400 teachers in the audience, and they were the judges. There was a man from Belgium, and they spent a long time introducing him, specially flown over from Belgium to do this experiment. No mention about the fact that I'd come from Warsaw, who cares? And then they had a man, a famous chemistry teacher, did organic chemistry experiments. Now, the famous chemistry teacher went first. He made so much smoke and broke all the safety rules that half the auditorium had to leave, so he was disqualified. Then we had me doing my hydrogen peroxide, and then we had the Belgian chap, who did a 1-pot reaction with 5 chemical reactions, and he told everyone a story about a fisherman who went fishing. And do you know who won the prize? The Belgian man. So I thought, fine, okay. So this is how the British teachers value what's important in chemistry. Szydlo will carry on. I don't know who they're communicating with, but the children that I teach seem to like what I'm doing. Not only that, I did a PhD in the history and philosophy of science, because I believe that people should know where it came from. I did a PhD on a Polish alchemist, Szydlo, and I proved in my thesis that he played a significant role in the discovery of oxygen. And the discovery of oxygen, which is presented to everyone like this. In a school textbook, a 15-year-old will read this. Oxygen was discovered by Joseph Priestley in 1774. And that's all they read. So what does a student think? Oh, well, you know, Priestley did some experiments. He was a bit of a boff. He did some experiments, and he got some oxygen. Hey, easy, anyone can do it. No, it took 2,000 years. You look around. Where does air look like a mixture? Nowhere. And that's what is missing in today's education. Chemistry has lost its respect as a science where people understand the children, and you don't have to be serious, you don't have to make things heavy and difficult, you have to tell the truth. And the truth is that chemistry has an ancient history, and not only chemistry, physics and biology. All of the sciences which we benefit from on an everyday basis have an ancient history which goes back to the origins of humanity in East Africa 100,000 years ago. And until the true facts are taught to children, we are going to continue to wallow in environmental problems, consumerism, all sorts of other nonsenses, because people have lost the respect and the dignity for science which it deserves. How do I plan lectures? When I plan a chemistry lecture, which I give many of all the time, my most important thing is education. It's to teach something. If I show an experiment, it must have at the root why I've done that experiment and what the children have learned. So that's the first thing, is education. But secondly, they must enjoy it. You cannot show an experiment and not make someone enjoy the experiment. And it's very easy, because chemistry is the most theatrical of all subjects. You know that. You mix some liquids together, they change colour. Wow! So the chemistry teacher has the great advantage over many others, because it's so easy to impress. So, firstly then, educate. Secondly, make the lesson interesting. Now, there is no doubt, anyone will tell you, that if you have a theatrical background, then this will be a great assistance to you. And many of the great lecturers of the past, Humphrey Davy, Michael Faraday, George Porter, there are countless others from in Germany, everywhere around the world, who have been brilliant lecturers, who've been able to entertain an audience, but they all taught the fundamentals. And what's important, they all stood the test of time. To this day, their names will go down in history, not only as brilliant scientists, but as brilliant teachers. And that is the staying power. No amount of gimmicks, high technology can replace the truth put in the correct context. In that sense, we will then have a planet where we can respect the achievements of science and technology. One of my favorite sayings today is, we live in times when people know nothing about anything and are terrified of everything. What's important to add to that is they don't actually know that they're terrified. Let me explain why. Every so often in England, you buy a new car every 7 years. What's the point of buying a car for 7 years? To show it off as a fashion accessory? To show it off? Or because you're afraid your car might break down and you might not know how to fix it? How many people can repair a vacuum cleaner, a washing machine, a motor car, a lawnmower, anything? The answer is, I've repaired all of them. Today's world, everything, too much electronics. That's the product of the industry today, which we can't determine. There are masses of electronic gadgetry. Things are made to be recycled, from ones to be thrown away. Do you know how much energy is wasted when you scrap a car? In England, you scrap 1 million cars every year. That is an enormous waste of energy and material resources. So, by educating young people from the word go to respect the achievements of science and technology, I believe that that is the only way forward. And that's how I will continue to be. I am greatly privileged to be here. I'm in Mauritius for the 4th time. I'm here at the invitation of the wonderful, extraordinary Professor Ponnadurai Ramasamy from the University of Mauritius, who has gone to a great deal of trouble to organize UNESCO grants to get me over here, and I have become very, very good personal friends with him, because he sees the education in the same way that I do, I'm sure the same way that you do, and certainly in the same way that all the wonderful teachers that I meet wherever I go to. The problem is the politicians and the so-called education experts. But I'm going to finish off now by showing you I have been very fortunate that I've given many lectures at the Royal Institution of London in Great Britain, and I have been invited to give TED Talks as well. I didn't know what TED Talks were, but they got in touch with me about a year ago, and they said, could you do a TED Talk? So I said, I have no idea what this is, so people told me it's quite prestigious. So I've now done 2 of these. They've asked me to do more, but I would like to show you a TED Talk for your entertainment, above all, which I gave in Newcastle in October last year. And it's on YouTube, so if we now can switch for the final session, and if anyone has any questions afterwards, I'll be delighted to answer them.
Thank you. From your point, you mentioned that there's a difference between how students were taught in the past and how they're taught today. And from what you mentioned, the way you teach, for example, is different in the sense that you teach and you provide information from a point of authority. So you talk of what you know, and you want your student to get and understand what you know. But this is not the case generally today, because people rely more on the modern systems of teaching, where even the tutors and professors themselves don't have confidence in what they're telling the students, what they're teaching, what they're giving out. First of all, the first question is, do you think it is possible to go back to that system in the past, which is considered the old system? And number 2, how do we go back to that system?
Thank you very much for a very, very intelligent, very grateful to you for those very, very perceptive comments. Now, the first thing is, the style in which I talk, this didactic style, that is not the way I teach all the time. That's the first thing. It is a style which I use and the teachers of the past used to use on occasion. It is true that in that style, what the downside of that style was, that if you were talking, it is very possible for a student to not listen and not pay attention, and that was what the problem was with that style. So if you were talking and you were not very interesting, which was for a lot of teachers the truth, then the student would come away from the lesson, as I did very frequently. I was appalling at university, never listened to anything. I couldn't understand it. I was dreaming about the football matches because I was an obsessive footballer. I used to be a QPR supporter because I grew up next to their football ground, but they're so useless now that I don't even talk about it, so I'm sorry. But the truth is that I've never listened, because when we had university lectures, the lecturer came, spoke for half an hour, for 45 minutes, and I never listened at all. There was no of this interaction. But in tutorials, there is the interaction, right? So, you know, the student and the professor. Now, I'm certainly not advocating a return to the old style. But what I'm saying is that old style, if some people can practice it, they should be encouraged to practice it. And what today, and there are many teachers who can teach and be able to explain, but of course the most important thing is the good relationship with the pupil. And if you have, I have always treated all my pupils as my friends. That's the first start. I have never ever treated teaching as a career. I'm very lucky in life because I have been paid to do what I would like to do more than anything else in any case. So I consider myself phenomenally lucky in that respect. So I teach to pupils because I wanted to tell them something which is relevant to the syllabus and to help them pass exams, obviously, but I would always go way beyond. And the communication is always, I will open discussion. I use the modern techniques just as much. In fact, today I was after a talk, I was talking to some girls and we were discussing various chemicals they have heard at the schools, and we were talking about chemical equations, and so we were able to have fully what the so-called the modern style. Now the other thing, whether you call it a modern or an older style actually is not really relevant, because throughout humanity people have learnt by communication. And for instance, the great philosophers in Greece, they used to have dialogues and they used to discuss things among themselves, but they had orators who would also proclaim. So I think it's a question of what system. Every teacher will have their own style, you see. But I think the most important thing is, for the first thing, for the teacher to have a warm relationship with the students and trust. You see, I trust all the students. A student would never ever do something against me because I trust the students, and mutual respect, and also the teacher must have knowledge. The teacher must have knowledge. The students will respect the knowledge. The problem with the old style of system, with the old system in chemistry, was that there was too much, which I agree with, there was too much factual learning. So you used to learn the reactions of nitrogen compounds, the reaction of chlorine compounds, and used to have, and in the exam you simply turned out all these facts. In the early 70s, this was recognized in England, and they invented a syllabus called the Nuffield syllabus, which I taught for 20 years, which was a brilliant syllabus because it combined deep factual knowledge at the same time with some analytical solutions. So you had to apply your knowledge and work out problems. And that ran for 20 years. They abolished that system. Ever since then, the exams in chemistry have become easier and easier, and you know that in England the grades the pupils have been, there have been grade inflation. So they've been saying every year for the last 25 years the exam results in the country are better. That means that the students are cleverer, which is nonsense. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows that. They become more stupid because they're more arrogant. Arrogance is one of the problems of society today. We think we are cleverer than caveman. Not true. caveman was at least as clever. If you went to a Polynesian island today to see a so-called primitive tribe, you will find people there you know far more intelligent than yourself than myself. They have not had the opportunity. But in all human beings, in all races, intelligence is something which we've all got. And that's what distinguishes us from animals. But because people today are surrounded by so many achievements, there is a natural tendency for arrogance. We're cleverer than they used to be. No. It's persons who think that are clever that are actually more stupid, as we know. So thank you very much. The answer is any style which the teacher can achieve a result with is acceptable, and I will use any style in my teaching to galvanize an audience. Very perceptive comments. Thank you so much. Any other? Sorry, let me get rid of this. I'm not used to teaching with a microphone. I'll be very happy. Another question over there. Another question over there. Yes.
Yes, I will reiterate the thanks already expressed by several members of the audience. Well, this is my daughter. She's in Form 4, studying chemistry, and she's greatly enjoyed your lecture. But I'm putting a question to you on behalf of my son, who couldn't come, who's 8 years old, which is precisely the age at which you fell into the chemistry cauldron.
Yes, yes.
And like you, he has a chemistry set now, and he's extremely interested not only in chemistry, but also in alchemy.
Yeah, right.
And I saw that this was one of your areas of interest. What can you tell us about alchemy?
I can tell you a huge amount about alchemy. Alchemy was, in essence, a grand philosophical system to explain the way in which the universe works. And it was a system which derived from Greek philosophy, and other ancient philosophies, in which people tried to explain how changes occur in nature. Now, whether these were the movements of the planets, or whether these were changes such as iron going rusty, or grass growing, or chickens hatching out into eggs, all of those changes were considered to be part of the grand scheme in which the universe works. The alchemists used to believe that the whole universe is one, which everything is dependent on everything else. And they had they used to reason by correlations. What is up there is what is like down below. The macrocosm, the microcosm. If something behaves up in the planets like this, we can find a parallel situation on Earth. Now, this grand philosophy, of course, evolved over thousands of years. It evolved from ancient Egypt, from the ancient Egyptian, their astronomy, their mathematics, their engineering, which was very, very sophisticated, and combined with observations of changes, Aristotle in the Greek philosophers' world, gave the theoretical basis for carrying out experiments. The big breakthrough came after Aristotle, when people started, philosophers in the world of Greek philosophy, the philosophers were people who thought about the universe. So they didn't do any experiments, they observed. They observed eggs hatching out into chickens, they observed acorns growing into oak trees, they observed volcanoes, they observed snow, ice, meteorological phenomena, and on the basis of those observations, they constructed a grand theory of the universe. And Aristotle was able to summarize this. He lived about 2,300 years ago. It was Empedocles, was another of the Greek philosophers who first put forward the idea, but Aristotle gave it the firm roots. Now, it was around that time that people started to do experiments. The people started to do experiments to actually try and understand why certain things happened. So we have examples of Hero of Alexandria, who was an engineer who built the first so-called steam thing, a little copper globe filled with steam with two pipes sticking out. And when they were at opposite ends. As the steam came out, it made the globe rotate. That was an example. Philo of Byzantium in 79 AD described a flame going out when it was put under a glass cover, and he couldn't explain it. And that eventually led to investigations on the nature of air, on the nature of breathing. Now, the alchemists had, they had objectives. They had an experimental program which involved a number of aims. One of the aims was to improve our life on this planet, the quest for immortality or the quest for better health. So, say for example, they were therefore trying to make, they believed that gold was a symbol of perfection, and therefore if you could transmute a base metal into gold and immerse yourself deeply in thought through prayer and through meditation, you too could rise and interact with nature to make this gold. As you were attempting, and this is with the idea of the philosopher's stone, the transmuting agent, which would, do you know, I was interested in alchemy at the same time, by the way. It was about year 8 or 9 I first read about alchemy. It's extraordinary, it's very hugely fascinating, right? And then another thing, so the transmuting agent for changing base metals into gold, how does that work? Can we make it? Another thing was, it was the philosophy of palingenesis, palingeneza. That is the idea of resurrecting a dead body and bringing it back to life again. This was of huge interest to the alchemists, and they had a program of experiments which they carried out with plants. For instance, apparently, if you burnt certain plants and you burnt them to ashes, if you warmed up the ashes, then the ashes would take the form of the plant again. It would make the shape of the plant. Apparently, such experiments were done. They've never been reproduced, obviously. Experiments in reproduction. How do animals reproduce? How do plants reproduce? These are experiments specifically with human reproduction. Experiments were carried out on homunculus, seeing whether you could generate a human being from the male sperm alone. That was the work of Paracelsus in the 15th century, when they used to immerse male semen in rotting dung for 40 days to see whether they could get little human beings coming out of it. Obviously, that was also, but they were interested in the concept of reproduction. They were interested essentially in how to make life from inorganic things. Making the universal elixir, the universal solvent that could dissolve everything. That was another one of their aims. In their philosophy also, they believed that the entire universe was alive. There were 3 living forms. There were plants, animals, and minerals. Minerals lived the longest, and they were the simplest. Plants lived shorter, and they were more complicated. Animals lived the shortest, and they were the most complicated. So that was the idea of pan-vitalism, that the entire universe is alive, including the rocks, you see. So these various ideas of the alchemists resulted in a program of activities, but at the same time, technical chemists made great advances in technology. So in the Arabic world, for instance, metallurgy was very, very advanced. Ceramic making, metallurgy, astronomy, mathematics, all of those were very advanced in the Arabic world 2,000 years ago, if not earlier. And that the knowledge which the various civilizations gathered became translated. The work of the Arabs became translated via Latin text into Europe, and there we had the birth of European alchemy in the 10th, 11th centuries. So alchemy, to summarize, was a grand philosophical system of interpreting everything in the universe. Masses of experiments were carried out to achieve the philosopher's stone transmutation. In many cases, the experiments didn't succeed, in most cases, but they made a remarkable amount of new apparatus for purification of substances. They made many discoveries of a chemical nature but by accident. So Hennig Brand in 1669 discovered phosphorus by roasting urine with coal at a high temperature, hoping to make the Philosopher's Stone, but in fact the whole flask started glowing white, and he had actually made white phosphorus. So the alchemists in their work made a number of very significant discoveries. They were very profound thinkers. They had a profound philosophy of nature and the way that the nature works. They had a spiritual side. Alchemy had a spiritual side to it as well. I would argue that modern science does as well, because at the end of the day, when you are carrying out an experiment or when you are thinking, your mind is involved in it. So there is you can't, the mind must be there in order to interpret the results. So I hope I've given you a little bit of an answer. I'm certainly not an expert, but it's a hugely fascinating topic, and I wish your son many successes and happiness with his chemistry set. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We could probably take one more question if anybody else. No? Well, if not, I would like to thank Andrew on behalf also of the British Council and the University of Mauritius and SPARC, the SPARC Club and STEAM that Jason presented before. Thank you very much.